Welcome to episode 2 of the New Agrarian Podcast. Today's guest has been practicing beekeeping for more than 60 years. I've really been looking forward to talking to him on this show. Today's guest is Al Avitable. So, you started kind of getting into your background a little bit. You went to college in Connecticut?
Yes, I went to Fairfield University as an undergrad.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you studied biology, right?
Yes.
So, what was your first job out of college?
First job, graduated Fairfield in 1957 and was a high school teacher at Crosby High School and taught general science.
Okay. So you taught general science, talking about cells and whatnot.
Yeah, well, it was pretty general. There was a lot of, small chemistry and physics in the program, in the general science. It was I did demos almost every day, which made it fun.
Yeah. And then
I, while I was doing that, I was getting my master's at Southern, and then I did some graduate work at Cornell University, and then I taught 2 years high school, went to Cornell for a doctorate, which I never finished, and then got a position at UConn, University of Connecticut, at the Waterbury campus.
So you're teaching at UConn Waterbury, teaching biology, right?
Yes.
So at this point, we still hadn't focused directly on bees, right?
Not yet. Yeah, I was, if anything, I thought I would focus on mammals, but my second year at the campus, a swarm of honeybees landed on a forsythia bush, maybe just 2 feet above the ground, and that started my career with honeybees.
So what happened that day?
Well, interesting question in the sense that students came running to my office and said that there was a swarm of termites in a forsythia bush. And I was almost reluctant to go out to look at it, but I did. And although I had never seen a swarm of honeybees, I knew what a honeybee looked like, and I knew it was a swarm of bees. And this was on Hillside Avenue in Waterbury, and at the time, 1962, of course, there was no Varroa Mite in North America, and there were bees in between the walls of houses and in tree cavities, even in the city of Waterbury, because frequently thereafter I would get calls to pick up swarms. And then, luckily, the day of the swarm, one of my students, Bruno West, who incidentally became Charles Lindbergh's dentist in Hawaii, his father kept bees. And so he went all the way to Bristol to pick up some old hive bodies, and we got a big plastic garbage can, put the swarm in it, and I had just bought a home and property in Bethlehem, Connecticut, and that's where we brought the swarm. Dumped it in front of the hive, knew very little of what to do. A lightning storm ensued, and I would just look at the hive from a distance for the rest of the year. There were only a few bees going in and out, so I suspect the swarm left. And then I took a correspondence course from Cornell University on beekeeping and ordered some package bees the following year, and then it progressed from there.
So was your beekeeping endeavor that first year successful?
With the year we picked up the swarm,
Yeah.
No, it was a total failure. Yeah. So never give up, I guess, is the point here.
Yes. Yep, exactly. And a lot of our viewers are kind of on the fence about starting beekeeping. Why would somebody get started in the field?
I guess various reasons. Since the Varroa Mite was discovered in Florida around 1986, I thought the people interested in beekeeping would decline. Instead, it's gone in the opposite direction, and more and more people are beekeepers. And once, way back in the 60s, if you went to a beekeepers meeting, it was mainly all males, and the wives of the beekeepers, the male beekeepers, would go in the kitchen and prepare the lunch. And by 1975, some women remained in the audience to the chagrin of the beekeeper men. But then it started to turn around. Now, probably half the beekeepers are women. Yeah, so big change since the 1970s.
Wow. Yeah, actually, you're not on TikTok, I assume. No, it's a social media app.
Yeah.
There's a woman on there. She's very famous for beekeeping in Texas, and she collects swarms all the time. And she's very famous for just going into these swarms and no protective equipment. I don't know if she smokes the bees. Sometimes she does, but just bare hand, breaking apart sheds, collecting the swarms, just brushing them into boxes and whatnot. I'm sure you've done plenty of that, but have you dealt with any particularly angry hives and got stung pretty good in your day?
Sure. By the way, if you ever go into beekeeping, always wear a veil because you don't know what may happen. You don't know the condition of the bees in any particular hive, so don't be brave. It's silly. Once, for instance, I got a call that there was a swarm at Caner Tech, which is a technical school in Waterbury, and I went over and I met some of the teachers, and they said, yeah, this where the swarm was, and they said it was stinging people. And I said, no, swarms are usually docile. So I went over there, and sure enough, it started to sting me, the bees in the swarm. And what had happened is the students were throwing rocks at this swarm for a couple of days, and the bees in the swarm were emitting the alarm odor, so these bees were quite aggressive. Another reason, although most people will tell you swarms are usually docile, and they usually are, but you never know all the factors that are at work when you go to a swarm. So put on a veil. It won't hurt you.
Yeah. And Al, you're obviously so knowledgeable in this field, man. In fact, he brought a copy of one of his books. How many books do you have you published in beekeeping?
Well, that's the only book. This is in its fifth edition at Cornell Press, and last year it was the top seller of the top 10 for the whole 12 months of the year.
Wow. Beekeeper's Handbook.
Yeah.
So what actually how did you know that this was like your passion? When did that happen where you were just like, all right, this is my thing?
Oh, I'm not sure. As I said, the first swarm that we collected at the UConn campus failed, and I started again, and then I took a correspondence course from Cornell University, and and one of the instructions in the course, or one of the obligations, was to attend a bee meeting, which I didn't even know there was such a thing, but there was the Connecticut Beekeepers Association, and so I went to the meeting knowing no one, and got acquainted with people and became a member, and that carried on, became program chairman of the association, and eventually the president. And interestingly, in the 70s, as beekeeping exploded for another time, there was, we could call it swarming. One beekeeper left and started the Eastern Beekeepers Association, and another one started the Western, which now is Backyard Beekeepers Association. So in the state of Connecticut, there are 3 different beekeeping associations.
Okay. Do you still have bees? Do you still?
I did. Well, I do. I still have bees, and I still tend to bees, and I've been for the last year or two the chief beekeeper at the White Flower Farm in Morris, Connecticut, which has been interesting as well. I do have an assistant that works there that helps me.
Okay. They're lucky to have you there, I'm sure.
Well, I hope so.
So, if somebody wanted to start beekeeping this year, what is like a good starter kit that you would recommend?
Well, I'll mention a couple of things just for assistance. I will be offering a beekeeping course at the OLLI program at UConn and Waterbury. You could look it up. I'll be offering a course at Flanders Nature Center. And you should, if possible, take a beekeeping course, which will help, although I did it without doing that. I don't even know if they were available at the time. And usually there's several ways to start beekeeping. You could either wait for a swarm and have somebody notify you of the bees in the swarm and collect it. You can remove an established colony from a building or a tree cavity that the tree is being cut down. Or the more common way is to buy a package of bees, and this is usually a 3-pound package with about 10,500 bees in a queen. And of course you have to buy bee equipment, but there are several, maybe 3 to 5 big beekeeping equipment companies throughout the United States. In fact, there's one smaller company right in Torrington called Mike's Bees, where you can get the packages and the equipment.
Okay. So to once if they were to collect a swarm, what kind of boxes arrangement do they need?
So if you collected a swarm, you would have to hastily get some equipment to install the swarm into. And you need, although we don't have any visuals here, you need basically what they call a bottom board, 2 deep hive bodies, 10 frames to each hive body, and an inner cover and outer cover. And you need a gallon of a brand new paint can with no paint in it, because you'll have to feed the swarm or the package sugar water until it is established.
Okay. And then as far as the equipment that goes along with checking the hive?
All right. So you need a veil, either a full suit or just a head veil. And you need a hive tool, because bees collect, I think, five things when they go out on collecting flights. They collect pollen, which is their protein source. They collect nectar, which is their carbohydrate source. They collect propolis, which is a mixture of plant sap material, which they mix with wax. And they also collect, what else is that? There's a fourth item they collect, and I'm trying to, honeydew, honey it's called, and aphids will stick their proboscis in a leaf and suck the sap out, only wanting to obtain the proteins in the sap, and they excrete the sugar content. So bees will fly to trees that are loaded with aphids and collect this sugar called honeydew, which in parts of Europe is more cherished than regular honey, which is collected from the nectar of a flower.
Yeah, those aphids wreak havoc in the greenhouse for me too, and they get that sticky. That's the honeydew everywhere.
That's what it is.
Okay,
yeah.
That's cool. Speaking of Europe, where in the world who's the best beekeepers in the world?
Who's the best beekeepers in the world? I don't know. That's hard to say. I think all over the world there are very good beekeepers and some not so good. But
What about from a production standpoint?
well, production of, let's say, honey. Use honey, for example. It depends on the abundance of floral sources in the area the bees are situated. So, for instance, if you look up in the United States where there are apicultural professors, bee professors, you would have an inkling that those are states where honey production is high. Florida, New York State, California, Texas maybe, just to mention a few.
Okay. And obviously, here in New England, we're unlucky that we have really cold winters compared to like Florida and stuff like that. I think bees in the winter is something that I think a lot of people don't think about. What do bees do in the winter?
Okay, what do bees do in the winter? Well, they bring in grasshoppers who sing in the hive, and that keeps them in a fairly jolly condition. But that aside, the nature of honeybees is they're perennial insects, so they live through all the 4 seasons in the Northeast. And how they manage to live through the winter months when there's no flowering plants, and bee flight is usually restricted once the temperature drops to below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So how do they live through the winter? You have to have food, obviously, if you're not flying and collecting nectar and pollen. So bees are hoarders, and during the summer months and spring and fall months, when there's nectar-producing plants, bees collect without stopping. They don't take inventory and say, we have 50 pounds, we can rest now. They'll collect 200 or 300 pounds in certain areas. And so in the winter, when the temperature drops below 50 Fahrenheit, they start to congregate or cluster. And as long as they're in contact with honey, they're eating honey, and with the contraction of the thoracic muscles, the center of the cluster could be in the high 80s to 90s Fahrenheit. And as long as they remain in contact with the food source, they can live through the winter. They do that even up into Canada.
So because there's no nectar sources available in the winter, they only consume honey, right? Or do they make honey in the winter?
No, they just consume the stores.
Okay. Would you say that what's the biggest killer of beehives?
Well, they don't until 1986. Beekeeping was relatively easy, and the only big problem was what is called American foul brood, and it would kill the larval bees and eventually the entire hive. And but it was not. This started, by the way, the bee inspector program across the United States, and therefore you can. Even Connecticut has a full-time bee inspector who will check your hives to make if you even suspect American foul brood. And because of the outbreak of foul brood in 1922, Congress restricted the importation of bees from other countries. However, in 1986, to the chagrin of the bee world, in Florida, they discovered a mite called the Varroa Mite or Varroa destructor, and this mite is devastated bee colonies from Southeast Asia, where it originated, the mite, all the way through Russia, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and is now probably all over the world. Australia and New Zealand were free of the mite, the last 2 standing areas, but mites were discovered in Australia in the fall of 2022.
Wow. Geez.
So this is a huge problem, and beekeepers were always angry at the use of pesticides on various plants because it would kill some bees, and now beekeepers are forced to use miticides in the hive to keep the mite population low. There's no way that you can kill all the mites in a colony, and everybody in the United States that has bee colonies, there are mites in the colonies.
Every single colony.
Every single colony. The only thing you can do with the miticides is knock the mite population down, but they evolve very quickly, and new miticides have to be brought into the picture. And one other interesting factors is at first, from an old publication, it was believed that the mites were sucking the bee's blood, and they usually don't kill the larval bee while they're feasting on it, and it does most often becomes an adult honeybee. But anyway, this was universally thought of what the bee mite was feeding on, but a researcher in Maryland thought blood is not really as good a food item as other food items, and so he started doing some more investigation, and apparently now they're feasting on the fat body. But a recent paper said it's probably a combination of the fat bodies and the bee blood. So the jury isn't completely settled on these factors, but the leaning is towards the fat bodies.
That's crazy. I didn't know that. Every single colony.
Yeah, every colony. There's no colony known to be free. Recently, just in the last week, there's a claim that in Cuba there may be no mites. Whether that's absolutely true or not, I don't know. And Puerto Rico seems to have a low mite population.
Wow.
Other than that, they're everywhere.
So when you buy bees, when you get them shipped, they have mites in the bags?
Yeah, when you buy a package of bees, or you buy a nucleus colony, or an established full colony, it will have mites.
Wow.
Yeah.
We know our good friend George Lyman. Shouts out, George.
Yeah.
I remember him doing something with like powdered sugar in the mites.
Right. Yes. There's obviously everybody's trying to find a way to reduce the mites, and one way was to put powdered sugar on the bees in the colony, and bees are always grooming themselves or being aided by other bees grooming them. And in the process of trying to get the powdered sugar off their bodies, they may scrape the mite off. And if you use what they call a sticky board on top of the bottom board, the mites will fall and get stuck on the sticky board, so you can get somewhat of an accurate mite count. However, if you don't have a sticky board, they'll just come right back up and reattach themselves to the bee.
Okay. So that's like the only remedy is miticides, and there's just different medications, and then you still can't eradicate them. They just...
No. And another thing, they use oxalic acid in a vaporizer, so it sublimates from solid to a gas. And that kills a great deal of them, but like everything else, not all of them. And unfortunately, oxalic acid, when it sublimates to a gas, can do a lot of damage to your lungs. And so you need a full commercial respirator and so on. So, this is a tough battle. And, there's a guy in a great beekeeper, I shouldn't say good beekeeper, in Vermont, and I can't think of his name offhand, and he's treatment-free. But what people don't realize is he's treatment-free, but he's not mite-free, and that's a huge difference. Yeah. And so what he does is he has backup colonies, nukes all the time. So when his colonies crash, he has backup. But people go up and buy his queens, and he never says, I'm treatment free and mite free, but people take that first part, treatment free, and they think they're mite free, his bees.
It's like adding the word organic to...
Yeah. Right. They went to the USDA Baton Rouge bee station. They went to Eastern Russia. They have less mites because they've been dealing with them a lot, and they brought semen over. So there are Russian bees, and then they say you got designated as a Russian bee raiser and so on and so on, but they still have to be treated.
Yeah.
So it's not resolved.
And you were talking about American foul brood. I took one of your classes years ago, and I think, is this the one that you said if you get this, you got to bury the frames in the ground and like burn them?
The usual approach was if you had American foul brood, you can't cure it. You can provide something that would stop the kill the larva, the bacteria. It's a bacteria. However, the spores cannot be killed by any medication. So once you withdraw the medication, the spores emerge and the foul brood comes back. And so the old saying was the best cure for American foul brood is you dig a ditch and a hot fire on a dark night, and you literally throw everything in the ditch and burn it and bury it.
Oh, my gosh.
But now there are some methods, some very few states have it, where a radiation apparatus where you can bring all the equipment and it gets irradiated, and that kills the spores, and you could reuse the equipment.
Jeez.
Yeah,
wow.
But as I said earlier, that's what started the inspector program, which is in most every state in the country.
Yeah, makes sense. You said prior to the mite, beekeeping was easy?
Yes.
Was there anything that would kill hives? Did the winter ever kill the hives?
Oh, yeah. Well, obviously, I mean, beekeeping was easier to deal with because there was no parasite like the mite. But, of course, if a hive failed to store sufficient honey, some would starve before the winter ended. So the old saying used to be, take your winter losses in the fall, meaning if you had a weak hive, just eliminate it because it isn't going to make it through.
Yeah.
There was also cellar wintering way back when people actually brought the hives into their cellars. There was no central heating, and that worked pretty well. And I should mention, whose name I will not be able to recall, there was a beekeeper in Falls Village, Canaan area, who wrote a book on beekeeping. He was quite famous, and he kept a diary for maybe 25 to 30 years, which is now in the Hewitt collection at Yukon Dodd Center at Storrs, which has a lot of interesting information in these diaries.
Jeez. Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so bee losses do occur in the fall. In the fall through the winter months, when mites were not present, and even now when mites are present. Sometime the cluster, it might get cold, and the cluster in the winter will contract sufficiently that it's separated itself from the stores, and it will stay in that contracted mode to preserve heat, and it could starve to death with a frame of honey just inches away.
And in the fall, the worker bees kick all the drones out, right?
Yeah, usually in the fall. Honeybee colony, by the way, usually is like an escape word, but it's a fact. When you're talking about bees, you almost always have to say usually. So in a bee colony, let's say in the summer months, usually there's one mated laying queen. up to possibly 40,000 worker female bees, and the queen is a female as well, and male bees called drones. And as when nectar flows sort of ebb, even in July, bees will start hauling out the adult drones to die. And in the fall, by the fall usually, all the drones are evicted. This is what sisters do to their brothers in the bee business. And so the queen starts laying drone eggs again in the, say, probably starting March or April. And the worker bees have, what's the number of chromosomes? Oh, God. Let's see. Yeah, 16. So
he remembers the chromosomes.
16 and 16 is what?
32.
Yeah, so worker bees and the queen have 32 chromosomes, but the drone is a haploid. In other words, when the queen lays a drone egg, it doesn't fertilize it, so drones have only 16 chromosomes.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is when bees swarm, the queen, the parent queen, leaves with the swarm, but before that, she lays eggs in queen cells, which are going to emerge after she leaves as virgin queens. And these virgin queens will fly into the sky when they're ready to mate to areas called drone congregating areas, which were discovered at different times by lofting a helium balloon with a queen tethered to it. And as they lowered the balloon in certain areas in the sky, there would be these huge drone congregating areas. And what is fascinating, among other things, is that each year the new drones go back to the same congregating areas that their brothers did the previous year and the previous year. There's one in England that still exists since the 16th century.
Wow.
And drones, of course, make the ultimate sacrifice. When a drone mates with a queen, he passes on his semen to the queen and dies. And the queen usually mates with 15 to 20 drones, so there's tremendous diversification of the female workers in the colony.
That's amazing. How does the queen, how can she lay drone egg, worker egg? Is there a system to that?
Yeah, apparently she has a valve. So she mates, as I said, with 16 to 20 drones, and she has a sac called a spermatheca, which stores all the semen. And she has a valve. If she lays a drone egg, she shuts the valve so no sperm passes through it. So the egg is deposited as an unfertilized egg.
So does she decide that? She's like,
yeah,
all
as
right.
far as we know, she makes that decision, yes.
Okay, because I swear, I think George told me something about she measures the cells.
Well, yeah, that isn't, that's the observation. Do we really know for sure? I don't think so, but they claim, so there's 3 possible cells on the honeycomb. Most of the cells are worker cells of a certain size. Drone cells are bigger. Queen cups and queen cells are totally different. And one theory is, how does she know to lay an unfertilized egg in a drone cell versus a fertilized egg in a worker cell? And they claim she measures the cell size with her forelegs. And some researcher glued some little triangles on the legs so she wasn't able to measure, and if she does that. And she laid eggs, drone eggs in worker cells and worker eggs in drone cells. So, but I don't think we know for sure what makes her make the distinction. And remember, most of the hive is in total darkness.
Right, okay, that's a good point. You mentioned queen cells. There was this really cool process that you showed me and George showed me called grafting queens. I think you had a video. It was a VHS video from I don't know when, but that was one of the coolest things. So you can actually make queens.
Yes. So he's referring to a video that was made. It was a film at the time.
Yeah.
Made into a video by one of the most outstanding beekeepers in Connecticut. In fact, the London Day newspaper on his death had a whole page about him, Alan Lathan. But there's the hexagonal cells or worker cells or drone cells, and queen cells start as a cup hanging down vertically. The worker and drone cells are slightly tilted from the horizontal on the comb, and the queen cell starts as a cup. And once the queen lays a fertilized egg in it, it becomes a queen cell.
Okay.
And then what makes the queen, it's apparently primarily the diet, because any fertilized egg can become a queen. So the larvae that emerge from the cell after 3 days in the egg stage are fed a high-protein diet called royal jelly. And this diet is one of the major reasons where you get a queen versus a worker or a drone. So after the 3rd day of larval life, the female bees that are to become workers are fed a less rich diet, whereas the queen cells and the larvae in them are fed royal jelly throughout their larval life. In fact, so copiously are they fed the royal jelly that even when the queen emerges, there's still a wad of royal jelly in the cell.
Wow, okay. And I think in this video, I saw a frame with like 10 queens on it, or 10 queens, like a ton of queen cells.
Yes, so Alan Lathan and everybody else, what they do, they get a special frame, and you can make artificial queen cells, and you put them on a bar on the frame, and let's say there's 10, and you attach them with wax, and then you go to, say, a colony that's got preferred genetics, and you can lift out the young larva. The best larva, female larva for starting queens is one you can't see, is kind of the joke in the business. But the younger the larva, the better, and you put her on the bed of, you've primed the cell with royal jelly, and you transfer the larva from a worker cell to the queen cell, and then you put it in usually a colony that's queenless and has a lot of nurse bees. And so raising queens has been done for a long time.
Wow. And then if one of those queens hatches, it kills the other ones, right?
Right. So obviously you have to get these queen cells out and put in separate little bee colonies called nukes, because if you don't, once the first queen emerges, she'll kill all the other queen cells that have yet to emerge.
Crazy.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And how much is a queen if you were to purchase one?
Well, when I started in the 60s, you could buy a mated queen for $3. And now you can buy a mated queen for $35 each.
Oh, I was going to think over $100.
No, but there are special queens that have characteristics like maybe they can keep the mite count down that go for $100 or more per queen.
Yeah, wow. The other cool thing that I think is pretty basic in the beekeeping world, but some people might not know, is the waggle dance.
Yes, right. So obviously, bees don't just fly out of the hive and search for food. It would be too time-consuming. So I think in the late 30s, or maybe after World War II, German, I think Austrian scientist Karl von Frisch working with bees, discovered that the bees did it was referred to as a dance called a waggle dance, in which the bee, let's say, starts at 12 o'clock making a circle, and halfway around the circle, it makes a straight line up to where it started, wagging its abdomen, and then goes left and comes back to the center, goes back up and waggles, goes right, comes back up, waggles, goes left. And bees surround the bee doing the waggle dance, and believe it or not, they obtain information as to the distance of the nectar source and the direction. So this is quite efficient, obviously, for the bees not to fly all over in circles looking for nectar sources. So these scout bees find nectar sources and report back to the colony, and the foragers can harvest this nectar in a very efficient way. And while this is going on, during any particular sunny, warm day, scouts are continually looking for even richer nectar sources. And one researcher, Dr. Seeley, was doing, when he was at Yale, was watching bees doing this waggle dance, and all at once, about 11 o'clock in the morning, the waggle dancers shifted to an entirely new site. So you remember the bee is an insect and not very big, and maybe 40,000 in a great hive, and yet they're able to collect 300 to 400 pounds of honey in a year and during the growing season. So obviously there's got to be a very efficient and effective way to discover nectar sources and continue to find ones that yield the richest nectar.
Wow. And that guy discovered this?
Yeah, he actually got the Nobel Prize. There's no Nobel Prize in biology, but he got the Nobel Prize in medicine. Yeah.
Wow. Jeez. You know, this year I went out. I have a beehive out here. They all succumbed to mites this year, but I went out this fall to check them. I was actually during an open house here, and I took like a group of parents out there to check it out, and there was 2 skunks in there, like just eating handfuls of the bees. You ever deal with like mammal pests like that at your personal farm?
Oh, yeah, of course. Well, skunks are known to eat bees, and usually they come out during the night.
Yep.
And they'll scratch in front of the hive, and bees come out to see what's scratching, and the skunk scoops them up and eats them. And so researchers shot skunks in the act of doing this, and they obviously opened them up, dissected them, and there's stings all the way down the esophagus, but it doesn't stop the skunks from doing this. And so if you raise your hives a foot or 2 above the ground, usually then they have to expose their stomachs to start scratching, and there's less problems. But a long time ago, they used to use poison in a boiled egg and put it in front of the hive to kill the skunks. But talking about predators and pests of honeybees, of course, Connecticut was free of bears until maybe the 70s or 80s, and the bears came in from the Adirondacks in Massachusetts, Vermont, or New Hampshire, and that is the big predator problem now. Every beekeeper almost in Connecticut has to have an electric fence around their bee yard. Otherwise, it's not if, it's when. The bear will attack and destroy the hive.
Wow. And how many hives do you have at your
right now? Maybe 7.
And you got like a Fort Knox set up around?
Yeah, I actually have a Fort Knox set up, because I'm going to tell you, I have a double electric fence. Because sometime I'm doing research and I can't afford to have a bear come in and wreck the colonies.
So you're still doing research right now?
Yes.
What kind of stuff are you doing?
Well, one interesting thing I'm sort of working on is in the summer, on occasion, not every hive, you'll see all bees on the front side of the hive where the entrance is, with their heads down on the front walls of the hive, and they're rocking back and forth, not moving, not moving that position, but rocking back and forth with their jaws opening and closing and their forelegs sort of in motion. And we don't know what prompts the behavior. And we found, other researchers found they even do this motion inside the hive, this rocking back and forth, and they've even put, say, slate in front of the hive, and they still do this rocking motion. And I've tried a mirror to try to get to see the underside. I've used some black tape to see if little pieces of paint are coming off the front of the hive, and I've had no luck so far. But it's quite interesting, this activity.
That's pretty cool. Nice. And that research is for UConn?
Just in general, yeah.
You still write in publications?
Yeah, usually I write for the American Bee Journal.
Where can we see that? Just Google? Or
I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know what their status is, but American Bee Journal is published in Hamilton, Illinois, and you can ask for a free copy, and they'll be happy to send it to you. So there's two publications in the United States, the American Bee Journal and Gleanings in Bee Culture. I think they changed the name to just Bee Culture. And those are the two monthly magazines for beginners and people that have been doing it for a long time. They're usually research articles in both,
okay,
as well as popular articles.
Nice.
Did I ask you already, where'd you go to undergraduate? You told me.
Penn State.
Oh, Penn State. Oh,
yep.
Oh, there's a big bee lady down there now. Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, they're doing a lot with bees down there.
See, when I was at Penn State, I didn't delve into I was agricultural education, so I did mostly teaching. I worked in a greenhouse a little bit, just doing hydroponics, but the first exposure I got to bees was from George.
Yeah.
You know, when I went to Nanawag,
Yeah.
and he's like, I started in July. He threw me a veil, and he's like, come on, we're going to go check the hives up at the farm, the Berez.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then that was like the first exposure I got to it. And then I met you, and then like you're an incredible resource for this. So it's pretty awesome, man. You've done so much cool stuff. But I have a few questions that I wrote down from some people that watch our videos. Do a viewer question section.
Yeah.
So the first question is, why have frames in beehives not evolved while it was invented nearly 2 centuries ago? It's kind of a tough question, but
I don't know.
Just works good.
Yeah, probably that's it. So at one point, bees were just thrown into empty boxes, and they made their comb as they wished, but then you could not examine the colony because the comb was stuck to the walls, ceilings, and bottom board of the hive. So in, I believe, 1851, a minister, a graduate of Yale Divinity School, Lorenzo Lorraine Langstroth, looking in a hive. Yeah, quite a name. Graduated Yale Divinity School, was into beekeeping, and discovered what we think he was the first one to discover it, or at least the first one to apply the discovery, that the comb, one comb adjacent to another, was roughly 3/8 of an inch apart from the next comb, etc. So he made frames so the spacing was 3/8 of an inch from comb to comb. And obviously, with this 3/8 of an inch, bees on one comb with their back to the bees on the adjacent comb could work the comb without bumping into each other and so on. By applying these frames with the spacing of 3/8 of an inch, bees would not normally build comb in between the surfaces of two adjacent frames. So now with a hive tool or a screwdriver or whatever, you can remove frames and examine them as a consequence of this discovery or observation that led to the movable frame hive. And that revolutionized beekeeping worldwide.
Wow, just effective now.
Yeah, and the great guy suffered from migraines, and I think as a minister on the pulpit on Christmas Eve in Deerfield, Mass, or nearby, started his sermon and collapsed and died.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Jeez. Another person asks, what are the best bees for New England / Connecticut climate? Are there different types of bees?
Well, that's I don't think the jury. I think the jury's still out, but let's relate to the question. So there's about 21 different species of bees in the world, and 21 different species of honeybees in the world, and the North America, South America, Australia, Hawaii, just to name a few, did not have the honeybee. There were no honeybees in the Americas, and but there were honeybees obviously in Europe, and including England, which is, I guess, part of Europe. And so when the first settlers came, of course, sugar cane was unknown at the time to the Western world, and bees' honey was a sweetener, and beeswax provided light. The candles provided light. So the settlers of Jamestown, Virginia, wanted to bring honeybees from England over to Jamestown, and the first attempt was, I'm going to say 1605. I think I'm off. But anyway, unfortunately, the ship carrying the bees over ran into a hurricane and shipwrecked in the Jamaica area. I can't think of the island right now offhand. And apparently the bees all died. Some of the people on the ship survived. So so that failed. And then the first bees finally arrived in 1621 on ships from England. And they fit right in, started to swarm. And the Native Americans called the honeybee the white man's fly, having never seen a honeybee. So they spread quite rapidly and I forgot now the time, but they were in Connecticut, in less than 100 years from Jamestown. And the bee that was brought here from England was the German dark bee, Apis mellifera mellifera. And it was the bee that was kept until a Swiss army officer in the Napoleon army stopped in Genoa, Italy on a furlough or on a day off, and I guess that's a furlough too, and opened the hive and said, wow. He was a naturalist. Conrad von Baldenstein was his name. And he said, oh, these bees are so gentle and quiet, and they're humming Santa Lucia. He knew a little Italian, so he could tell the humming bees were humming this song. And he quickly brought some to Switzerland, and the word spread rapidly of this golden color honeybee that was quiet on the comb. The German dark bee sort of runs when you open the hive and look at a comb. they scatter around. This bee sort of just stayed very docile and continued to do whatever function it was preparing to do or working at. And so by 1859, Langstroth, among others, the one who invented the bee space, started importing Italian queens from Italy to the United States. And now, on the whole, most of the world, the hives are headed by Italian bees and Italian queens. However, also, I think the Carniolan bee is also kind of popular. So there were 4 bees in Europe: the German dark bee, the Italian honeybee, then the Carniolan, and the Caucasian bee. So there's 4 stocks, some people like to call them. They all can intermate with one another, so they're all the same genus and species, only have subspecies names.
Gotcha. Okay. When you buy bees, do you even think about it or the species or?
Yeah. Well, the people that sell packaged bees will say you can have a packaged bee with an Italian queen or a Caucasian queen.
Gotcha. Okay. Some of these other questions you already answered about equipment and whatnot. This question is, do you see beekeeping becoming harder or easier in the next 20 years?
It's more difficult. Until we can do some major harm to the Varroa Mite, beekeeping is not going to get easier.
Wow. Jeez. Maybe that could be I'm sure it already is a subject of tons of research out there.
Definitely.
What's more important than that?
Yeah.
But so that's pretty much all I have about bees, man. I think you hit all the good, very popular, discussion points. Anything else that you want to add for the good of the order with honeybees?
Well, it's an interesting hobby, or you can be semi-commercial or commercial. As I mentioned early on, the states where you have an apicultural professor are the states where the best ideal areas are for honeybees in terms of honey crops. But one of the big items, there's about 2 million colonies in the United States, and almost maybe 3/4 of them all are put on semis in January and moved to the Sacramento the valley there. I can't think of the name of the Fertile Valley in California.
Yeah, they do almonds, right?
Yeah, and to pollinate almonds. And almonds, most of the almonds in the world are grown in the Central Valley of California. And at one time they would pay beekeepers $2 a hive. Now they pay over $200 a hive. And they're the major pollinators of the almonds in the Central Valley. And then they're scattered. So many, many other colonies, I just saw this in one of the bee magazines, come from South and North Dakota. But they literally come from all over the United States and are trucked to the Central Valley. So bees are brought in to pollinate almonds, apples, cherries, cranberries, this is to name a few, oranges, and so on. So that they play a major role in increasing the production of the crops mentioned.
I love that. Awesome. And my last part of the podcast that I wanted to talk about is, it's not every day that I get to talk to somebody that's as well versed and long lived as you, Al. Do you have any cool memories from like your teenage years, your 20s, like with any like historical figures as it relates to, anything, pop culture, you got to have some cool stories for me, man. You got to give me at least like 1 or 2 cool stories. I know you got something. Shift away from beekeeping for the last...
Shift away from beekeeping.
It can be about bees if you want.
Well, I don't know if these are cool stories or what, but I grew up in the Italian section of Waterbury. My parents were Italian immigrants, and life was, of course, a lot different. We had a coal stove for heat and no central heating, no radio, no telephone, and, of course, TV had not come along. So I love nature from as far as my memory was concerned, and so spend a lot of time, especially during the summer when school was out, in the woods, fishing, hunting. No, not too much hunting, fishing. I did do trapping, trapped muskrats. There was a huge swamp, only not even quarter of a mile from my house, which unfortunately then was looked upon as something not desirable, and the city would bring all the garbage and fill the swamp, which was filled in the fall with ducks and Canada geese and so on, which was sad to see it go. But I spend most of my time associated with nature, and I guess that's why I went into biology.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. So awesome, Al. Well, if you guys want to read more about beekeeping from Al, definitely check out this book. This book's on Amazon.
Yes.
Yeah. Beekeeper's Handbook. Everything that you'll possibly need to know about beekeeping, I imagine. So, Al, thank you so much for coming on, man. And then you said you're teaching a few more classes coming up here?
Yes, I have. I'll be teaching a class at University of Connecticut on Fridays on how to become a beekeeper, and one at Flanders Nature Center in Woodbury. I think they're both on Friday, one during the day and one in the evening. And the classes will include 2 separate field trips to a bee yard with live bees, of course, and a demo on installing a package of bees.
Love it. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Al.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course.
It was my pleasure.
the goat of beekeeping, would you say? So, till next time. See you guys.